Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast, and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. My guest today is a very inspiring woman. Dr Anisha Patel is a GP specialising in women's health, whose world was turned upside down with a diagnosis of stage 3 bowel cancer. She's the author of the brilliant book, Everything You'd Hoped You'd Never Need to Know About Bowel Cancer. I found this such a powerful book. I'm so grateful to you for joining me today. Welcome, Anisha.
Oh, thank you, Rachel, for having me on.
I'm so glad we met at the Every Woman Festival. We were signing our books together, weren't we? And we got chatting, and I knew nothing about you then. And I think your book is amazing. So I'm going to start with, how did you manage to write it after everything you've been through?
Well, actually, writing became my catharsis. And that was actually one of the other talks I did at the Every Woman Festival about how writing is such a powerful tool. And obviously, when I was diagnosed, I really struggled. I think that unique perspective of a doctor and a patient, I really struggled with that loss of control becoming a patient. And I wrote my way through cancer. And so my friends encouraged me to basically share this on social media because it might help other people. And so from the moment I was diagnosed, right through treatment, and then with life beyond cancer, I still write my way through it as a catharsis, as a way of journaling. I know it now helps others. When I encountered problems through treatment or life after cancer, I would then look and research for solutions and then share those not only for myself, but for others. And so I kind of in my own head had a pat of my own thoughts about what a book might look like. Never did I think it might come to fruition, but it did. And I'm really glad it has, because actually it was another stage of therapy for me writing that book and letting things out and going through everything I'd written before and sort of almost processing properly what had happened when I was well once more.
What I found particularly powerful about it was that you are so vulnerable in the book, and so much of the book is dedicated to the emotional aspects of coping with cancer. That we start off with the facts and figures and what you need to know, and all the stages and the processes, but so much of it is about you and your journey and your personal vulnerability. So how do you feel now looking back at the book and those aspects of it?
It's really interesting, Rachel, because I was actually reading bits of it just to come and talk to you today again. And I was thinking, gosh, I really spill everything out here. And it does, it triggers emotions. But I think actually one of the things I learned through therapy, and bearing in mind I'd had no mental health issues before cancer, I've been really lucky with my mental health, but I encountered so many things from anxiety to PTSD to panic attacks that all sort of crept up on me. Actually, going through all of this with my therapist and allowing myself to be vulnerable was one of the biggest things I learned. And that vulnerability, we see it in social media a lot, people being more vulnerable and open, is actually really refreshing, and it's helped me when people are vulnerable. So it's always in the hope that this might help someone else as well, knowing that actually it's okay to feel all these emotions. You know, cancer is a really lonely place, especially when you're diagnosed younger. That none of my friends had cancer, thankfully. But actually trying to explain to people how you're feeling was really difficult sometimes. And we talk about this thing called toxic positivity, where people just want to say, oh, you're fine, don't worry, you're going to be grand. But actually I needed to express emotions. And so I think writing them down and showing people that it's okay to show these emotions actually is really important.
And I think you really succeeded with the book with that, because I do have personal experience of bowel cancer, but it was very, very quick. Not for me, but for my father. My father died of it, but he was already very ill, and then that was what finished things. And he was, in his 70s. but it was very, very quick. So I wasn't really involved in it. So I don't have ostensibly a reason to read your book other than that I wanted to read it before interviewing you. But I felt that there was so much in it in terms of resilience lessons for life that actually I, got an awful lot out of your book, even though I didn't need to read it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think we all go through some aspect of trauma in our life or hard times. And I think, that's what I wanted the book to show at the beginning at the end, was how we can take our experiences and try and thrive with them. But it's okay to fall off the cliff or fall off your horse, because actually there are ways and tools to get back on it. And I wanted to share how I'd done it, what I'd researched, even if I hadn't used those techniques, so that other people can go, actually, do you know what? X has happened to me. I've hit rock bottom. How am I going to build myself up? And actually, for my children, I obviously have a lot of guilt and have carried a lot of guilt about my diagnosis, but actually being able to show my children that you can turn things round even after adversity is one of the most important things to me as well. For them to see that, things will be hard in life, there will be challenges, but you can get back up from them with hard work and perseverance and a lot of resilience, as you say.
That's such a strong theme through the book, that you decided to be open about your diagnosis with everybody, but especially with your children. Tell us a little bit about that decision and what it led to.
The children are both, children of two medics. We're both doctors. My husband's a bowel cancer specialist. And so the children have seen, videos, and he's tried to teach them. And we've always been really open with our work. They're genuinely interested. But they knew something was wrong the day I was diagnosed. And they were 6 and 7 at the time. And for me, I didn't want any secrets. We're a close family. I wanted them to know, for us to be able to explain. And of course, they didn't quite understand at first, but they had play therapy. But all through treatment, we were really honest with them. They were really involved. They celebrated the good days and the days out with me. They knew, about the bad days as well. And actually, they've come and seen me full circle. So on the days where they were scared and petrified that they didn't want me to have chemo again because it made mummy ill, they would see it come round, and then I'd come out of chemo, and I'd be mummy again once more. But I think, I've been having CT scans every 6 months since my diagnosis. And I finally finished last year when I got my 5 years all clear, which is amazing. But, the children said to me, I'd always say, it's going for checkups. But as they got older, they started to ask the questions themselves. Are they looking for cancer coming back, mummy? And it's really interesting how, that natural they're being inquisitive, they're understanding the process of cancer and what happens has come naturally to them.
So talking about process, can you give us just an overview of your journey with bowel cancer and the process that you went through? And obviously, my listeners and my viewers, they hopefully might go and read your book. I really recommend everybody to go and read the book. It's a great read. It's a really good read.
Oh, thank you.
But tell us a bit about that journey.
So back in September 2018 was when I was diagnosed. And, for the listeners out there, by the end, I had a lot of the symptoms of bowel cancer. So I had blood in my poo. I was getting urgency. I had a change in my bowel habits, so I was going more frequently. My stools were looser. I'd had 2 severe bouts of tummy pain. And at the end, when I look at pictures, there was some weight loss and I was feeling extremely tired. So, for example, I was in Italy 2 weeks before diagnosis and I couldn't run. And I thought it was because it was so hot, but actually it was the extreme fatigue and I was taking siestas. And these symptoms crept up intermittently and gradually over a period of time. And initially I did think it was constipation and piles because it was infrequent. I was just been made partner in my GP practice. I had 2 young children. I was burning the candle. But then as things got more frequent, I initially went for blood tests, which were all normal, and then went back again a few months later where I had become anemic because I was losing blood. And I was diagnosed with stage 3 bowel cancer. It had spread to some lymph nodes, but nowhere else. And I had 2 major operations for my bowel cancer. So I had half my rectum, which is our storage capacitor for where we store poo before we go, and had half my rectum removed and a bit of my colon. And I had a stoma temporarily, which I found really tricky initially. I then had that stoma reversed because that stoma is formed to allow your bowel to heal. And then I went on to have 3 months of really grueling chemotherapy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I subsequently returned to work probably about 9 months in total after my diagnosis. Now, for me, actually, the hard work starts with life after or with a cancer diagnosis. You know, yes, treatment and surgery was brutal, it was painful, but it took me months and if not years to actually recover from my diagnosis, from the treatment. And I still have long-term problems today from cancer and the treatment. And every day I'm reminded of that because I don't go to the toilet normally, in inverted commas. I have bowel dysfunction. I can go to the toilet up to 15, 16 times a day. I still have been put into a earlier menopause because of chemotherapy. Was on HRT in my early 40s. I've got nerve problems in my hands and feet from the chemotherapy and sciatica, to name but a few things. But actually, I've got the tools now to manage those things so that I can try and live my life to the fullest. And I think that's what, any of us with a diagnosis of a chronic illness has to do. And I think my husband said to me, he said, Anisha, you've got to think of cancer and a diagnosis of cancer like a chronic illness, like diabetes, like other things, because actually you will need your tools and medications to manage that long term now. And he's absolutely right. But sometimes people forget this because they think, well, you're cured now, you've survived, But one of the things I'm really passionate about talking about is life after cancer and the psychological, physical, psychosocial elements of this, and raising awareness of this.
So let's talk about the psychosocial elements of this. What can you tell us about that?
So I think what I wanted to dedicate the second half of my book to was this: how it impacts relationships, how cancer impacts work and your return to work. And that was probably, again, one of the hardest things I did, was going back to being a doctor. How it affects our mental health and continues to affect our mental health in a roller coaster like fashion when it comes to whether you have scans or triggers or a friend's diagnosed with cancer or you've got loads of side effects or symptoms. How difficult it is to integrate yourself back into society, into your friendship circles, because actually you've almost entered this parallel universe of cancer where everything is totally different. It's a new normal that you're having to learn to live with, and how your perspective has changed. So Anisha that went into cancer, so the before cancer, is not the same as Anisha after cancer. And I've had to come to terms with that. With the grief as well, I've grieved for my life before cancer. And people say to me, you've got a wonderful life. And yes, I have. It's become enriched. But I've had to go through a grieving process multiple times for that life before, that carefree life, that life where I'm not worried about uncertainty, about my physical health, about my mental health, about my children's future. And also the aspect of, going through menopause. Now, we know, as you talk about all the time, Rachel, menopause in itself is a life event. And to deal with that on top of cancer, and for some ladies losing their fertility and their ability to have children, is absolutely heartbreaking on top of a diagnosis of cancer. And I just don't think that people realize this or think about this, because actually we should be grateful. And I am grateful every day, don't get me wrong, that I am free of cancer. But there is a whole host of people, because we have got better at treating cancer, and actually no longer is stage 4 for many people a terminal diagnosis. People are now living and thriving with stage 4. they are also living with all these other things out there. And we need to change that narrative that people are now surviving or thriving with life with or after cancer. And actually, they do need help and they do need support and they might need amendments at work. And you still need to check in with these people because actually, this is something that I think is really underestimated.
So how would you like that to change? What actual things do you think could be put in place to make it less difficult to survive the survival?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think we need more support. And it's one of the things that I'm working on with charities. And my dream is for this to become part of national NHS cancer care, is that I'm trying at the minute, and we are setting up a life after cancer clinic, for example. So people then get to see a specialist. They assess all the different things, components that I've said. So menopause, fertility, work, relationships, sex life, so forth, mental health, and actually can signpost people to the right places to get the help and support they need to allow them to integrate back into society with their families, with their friends, into work. Because there is a large proportion, 1 in 2 of us will get cancer, and it's becoming, unfortunately, younger and younger. There is a large proportion of the working population and young people getting cancer. And we need people to be able to live and thrive after cancer. So that's one aspect that I am actively working on with a couple of charities. And it's very exciting because we can use that template to support people. Because I wish I'd had that, but I had to squirrel around for it. I had to research the internet. And as a doctor, if I'm struggling to do this, that makes me really sad for everyone else having to do this. I think also talking about it. So me sharing what I'm sharing with you and in the book is also not only sharing it with the public and with the media presence that I have, but is also sharing it with health professionals, because my own surgeon has picked up my book, my oncologist, and they've gone, do you know what? My job is to save your life and give you that treatment. But wow, like reading what you've written, sometimes we can forget outside the little box of what we do, how much more there is. And that's why they've been inspired. The charity that I'm doing this with is actually connected to the hospital I had my treatment in. They're like, Anisha, we do this. And hopefully if I can do that in one hospital, we can try and do that in other places, because this is needed. And that is the dream, Rachel. I think for me, it's raising awareness that we still need help. And I'm also talking with corporates and in the workplace about invisible disability. So I look like this every day. No one, including my partners, they forget what's happened, but they don't know I've popped to the toilet 14 times and I've got a standing desk to cope with my back pain, and I have to have warm water to wash my hands, otherwise my hands are really painful. So all these little amendments have been made, but I've made them myself. Some people don't have that confidence when they first return to work. I didn't, I felt very vulnerable. So I want to be able to talk to people in workplaces and that message to spread, to say, actually, people can look completely normal when they come back from cancer treatment, or a lot of other conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, migraines, inflammatory bowel disease, so many conditions of invisible disabilities. But actually, we need to make reasonable adjustments so that we can make sure these people can work to the best of their ability.
Wow.
Yes, that is the mission. Come on, team.
Wow, that good. Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. Good for you. And I think the fact that you are a doctor makes it even more powerful, and also probably gives you a lot more influence, because there's a lot of people, outside the health service who would be feeling the same way,
Yes,
but are not in a position to make those changes.
I completely agree. And I want to take the voices of the patients, of the cancer community, which is why I am present online. Like when I was given the all clear after 5 years last October, lots of my friends said to me, Anisha, my account's called Doctors Get Cancer, change the name. Doctors Get Cancer too, sorry, change the name. Do you really want to be in this arena still? Absolutely, because actually I have collected so many voices. I've listened, I've heard the community. I know and have a good idea of what needs to be done. And if I need more support, I know exactly where to get it. If I want to do a survey, a questionnaire, what's important to you, I know where to get that information. And again, as a doctor, cancer never leaves me. Personally, because I'm reminded of side effects, but every day my job is to make sure every single one of my patients has not got cancer. It's constantly as a sieve in my head. So what do I do to manage that? I try and channel my energy into positive things, into going, right, okay, well, let's see what else we can do to help people. And that's the way I cope, Rachel. You know, that's the brutal honesty of it. This also helps me manage my life after cancer. It's not for everyone, that's for sure, but it definitely helps with the work I do.
I was going to say, yeah, how on earth do you manage that and get that balance right? But, you know, just being aware, I suppose, of the impact on you, because you've got all of these things to deal with that are left over from the cancer, and then you've got all of the extra stuff, and it must be exhausting, Anisha. I mean, it must be exhausting.
Yeah, it is exhausting, Rachel. And I think I'm one of those people that needs to be kept busy and can't keep still. But I am well aware of when something is getting too emotional, and I'll have a good old ugly cry, step away. I've got my own tools to deal with that now. I've had 5-6 years of practice now. But it can be exhausting, and I do need to step away at times and check in, regular breaks, regular holidays, exercise, you know, being just with my family and switching off. They're all my tools, and eating well. You know, I love cooking. I love mindfully cooking. I'm not one of those people that can practice mindfulness just sitting there, as you can imagine. I have to have a sort of active mindfulness, but it definitely keeps me going, and I get such a lift from some of these projects and the work I can do, knowing that we can make change, and knowing that people are sitting up and going, actually, yeah, that's really important. I hadn't thought about things like that. So yes, we keep going one day at a time.
But I mean, the fact that you're a GP as well, there is no escape, is there? There's no escape in your life.
There's no escape. And you know what? Yeah, one of my first palliative care patients was a bowel cancer patient. And I remember she was a hospice nurse actually. And I remember just sitting and hugging her, because there was nothing, she knew what I'd been through, and there was nothing else I could say or do. There is that level. I find my job more exhausting because my empathy's changed, because I have a greater empathy, not just for the family, but not just for the patient, but the ripple effect it has on the family. And actually what they're going through right now. And every time, you know, there's a new diagnosis of cancer, or someone's having a hard time recovering from cancer, you know, those consultations are always the longest and the most draining, but actually probably the most fruitful, because, you know, they've been heard by someone that gets it. And I hope they feel heard, definitely. But I have to make sure then I check out or debrief or talk to someone about it, just to kind of, you know, have some closure myself.
And in terms of the early menopause that you were pushed into, did you feel that you got support for that? Because there are so many stories about women who do not get any support, that, as you said, that the medicine, the treatment is for the condition, and nobody thinks about the implications of the treatment and what's going to happen, especially for women, especially around midlife. No. So how was your experience of that?
So apart from when I was consenting to having chemo, where my oncologist said you may be put into an early menopause, and do you want any more children, in the same sentence, I had no conversations after that. And what I really struggled with was working out what symptoms were post-cancer, post-treatment related, and what was menopause. And actually, as a specialist in women's health and the lead for menopause and women's health in my surgery, in my own head, I'd already decided I'm going to go on HRT. It's going to be fine, Anisha. Let's just crack on with chemo, and put it to the back of my head. But actually, I've only been on HRT for 3 years, and bearing in mind I'm nearly 6 years since diagnosis in September. And the reason for this is exactly what I said. I couldn't work out what was what. And I needed to work that through. But my menopause presented in a very unusual way. And I presented with something called HIT, which is histamine intolerance. And I just run the London Marathon, as you do, you know, when you need to raise money and you've survived cancer and want to show everyone that you're living still. And I was really ill afterwards because obviously I've lost a bit of my bowel, and I had profuse gut issues afterwards. But my surgeon was very supportive, said do it again. But I also developed a rash at the same time, and we all thought it was stress induced from the immense stress of the marathon and being unwell after with my gut. But this rash got worse and worse. And for a year, no one could work out what it was. I had biopsies. I was put on steroid tablets. I couldn't sleep. I was itching until I went to Dubai for 2 weeks and it got better. And I thought, oh, it's probably the sun. Sun often makes skin conditions better, like psoriasis or eczema. But actually, it was the change in diet. And then the penny dropped. So obviously here, when I'm not on holiday, I was drinking green spinach smoothies, drinking all the kefir, kombucha, all the things that are great for your gut, but what have they got in common? High histamine. And when I got to Dubai, I didn't have access to those products, and it all settled down, came back, went straight back on those products, and I worked it out myself that this was in fact a histamine intolerance. I went on high dose antihistamines. And one of the things we know about histamine is that it's very closely linked to estrogen. And as our estrogen levels peak and trough during the menopause, they can spike as well and then go cold, sort of low. It stimulates more histamine release, and everything was being driven. I was getting more migraines, more sort of allergy-like symptoms, worsening of my gut symptoms. This is all histamine intolerance. And I can send a link to you that you can share with your viewers for this to learn more about it, because actually what's really ironic is HRT makes histamine intolerance worse. So I've had to carefully titrate my estrogen, my estrogel that I use, increase it very, very slowly to stop these symptoms flaring up. And I've still got histamine intolerance. It's not as bad as it was because I've come off my antihistamines, but it made my life a living hell. And so I had to contend with this on top of menopause, on top of everything else. And I see what's really scary is 1 in 200 people might have histamine intolerance, and yet it's not being diagnosed. I've educated lots of GPs on it. And again, it's another thing to raise awareness of, because ladies say, I'm not getting better on my estrogen. Actually, if you have a look at the symptoms and you've got a lot of those symptoms which overlap with menopause, it might be due to high histamine. And there's a genetic component. So my mum had it. And I remember when she was going through the menopause, if she had 1 glass of red wine, her face would swell, her eyes would swell. This was all histamine driven. So red wine, alcohol, Prosecco, they were all high histamine. All make it worse.
Wow.
I know.
Now, because I'm obviously in the menopause space and with Meno Clarity, we have discussions about histamine, but it's not something I know very much about. And I'm thinking it's a resource we need to have on the Meno Clarity website now, about histamine intolerance. But so when I think of histamine, I think of grass. Yep. So how come it's in other products? I don't understand. How does that work?
So there's 2 sources of histamine. One is from the food we eat, a natural histamine, and one is from our body, and we release histamine within our body. But some people, we need it in our body, but some people release too much. And in menopause and in puberty, they're 2 of the times in a woman's life that you can have higher histamine levels. So actually going back to puberty for me, I had this development of quite severe hay fever, but actually it was probably just histamine. And I think at the minute, there aren't that many greater treatments for it out there. And there are various things that I tried, but the evidence is limited. So one of the things I tried was DAO enzymes, so diamine oxidase enzymes that you can eat or take before you eat. And they're expensive. So I only do that if I know I want to have a high histamine rich food, because for me, looking after my gut health is so important. But actually, ironically, all the things that are good for my gut health have high histamine. So it was getting the balance right, for me. because I'm already having to make slight dietary changes for my gut dysfunction from my bowel cancer surgery. Then my gut microbiome was wiped out from chemo. Then I'm dealing with histamine intolerance and menopause gut issues as well. But it's something that I want people to be aware of, because it's not spoken about, and because often people just get their HRT cranked up, but actually that makes the problem worse.
That's fascinating. I did not know that the extra estrogen can make the histamine intolerance worse. That is fascinating.
And we have to go slowly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now I'm sort of balancing as time's going on. The hot flushes are getting worse for me. So I have all the classic symptoms as well that people know about. And my migraines have got worse. And I've got joint aches, and I've got brain fog, and I lost my libido, and all the other things. And lo and behold, you put me on some estrogen, and I'm feeling much better. But getting that back, I'm still on that fine balance, and I still have to review my dose all the time.
And I'm just trying to think, you did you go into what's called a surgical menopause?
No, I went into a medical menopause. So mine was from my chemotherapy. So you've got surgical menopause. So if ladies have their ovaries taken out, then you lose your estrogen source, and that is a surgical menopause. And then you've got a medical menopause from chemotherapy or pelvic. So any radiotherapy that's done in the pelvic areas, which often a lot of bowel cancer patients have, or gynecological patients can have, and that can induce this medical menopause. And actually, unfortunately, these types of menopause do have more severe symptoms than a natural menopause.
Did you have to have progesterone as well as estrogen, or just estrogen?
So I have my Mirena coil in place, which I'm in love with, because I've had that since my child. I've got endometriosis, which again was only diagnosed at my bowel cancer surgery, but that's a story for another day. So I've always had heavy periods. So I've got a Mirena coil. This is my third. I'm also a fitter, so I'm obviously a great believer. And a little fun fact for you, Rachel, I actually audited my coils the other week, and I fit 6 a week, so it's not an uncommon thing. And 9 out of 10 of my ladies have kept their Mirena coil for a year, because obviously the biggest thing I see about the Mirena coil is, no, I've read on the internet. No, I'm just not having that. And I hear it all the time, but no one ever tells you their good stories, apart from people like me. It's not something you share around the dinner table. But obviously, everyone's always there willing to tell their horror story of it. So, yes, for me, it's been a real success for myself and a lot of my patients. And it's a great, the Mirena coil, in terms of HRT, is brilliant for people who have a lot of unscheduled or problematic bleeding that's been investigated and is not anything serious. And so we often use this, and patients are very thankful to then not be bleeding on their HRT.
And am I right in thinking the Mirena coil is just progesterone? Is that right?
The Mirena coil is just progesterone, and it slowly releases a tiny amount of progesterone to thin the lining of the womb, to protect the womb from the effects of the estrogen. And it's also a contraceptive, right? So everyone going through menopause still needs contraception. We recommend till 55. So it's there. It's doing lots of things.
So I'm interested in the connection with the heavy bleeding, therefore, because I was having a conversation just this week about somebody who was having heavy bleeding, and I had thought immediately, and again, I don't have the backup of this, but I think Dr. Geraldine Pryor, who is part of Professor Geraldine Pryor, in fact, who is part of Menoclarity, has written about this, because she's written a lot and done a lot of research on progesterone. But is progesterone the hormone that can really help with not having excessive bleeding in menopause? It sounds as if it is, because the Mirena coil is being used for that, or is a side effect of that is that heavy bleeding is reduced.
I think if you haven't got the right dose of progesterone, that's when you can end up with problems with bleeding. So obviously, any bleeding on HRT or postmenopausal bleeding, we should talk about with our GPs, because you need to exclude things like polyps or womb cancer and things like that. But once we're happy and we think it's due to HRT, there's been a policy review about this unscheduled bleeding with HRT this year, and guidance has gone out to all general practitioners and people who obviously prescribe HRT about how to manage this, because it's a big problem with if people haven't got the right dose of progesterone. So if you haven't got enough progesterone, you may not be shedding keeping your womb lining nice and thin. And that is the aim of progesterone, keeping that womb lining thin so that it doesn't build up, so abnormal cells can't form, so you don't develop womb cancer or endometrial cancer. And so the Mirena coil is a real gold standard in terms of thinning the lining of the womb. You've also got other progesterones, which you obviously get in patches, or the utrogestan that people take as tablets or vaginally. But we have been given advice to change the dose of the progesterone if you are on high doses of estrogen, because the more estrogen, the more womb lining will plump up. And so you need more progesterone to thin it down. So yes, there is a link, but the idea is the progesterone protects your womb and thins it down.
And that's where recently there's been some concern, hasn't there, about overdosing of estrogen, and not following it up with extra progesterone.
Exactly.
To protect the lining of the womb.
And that's my next audit, Rachel, for our practice as well, because obviously this guidance has all just come in fresh off the press. And I think we've seen, obviously I've seen in the last 2 years with all the media, the demands for HRT have gone through the roof. I must see several patients a day, Rachel, requesting it, asking me to review it. Often it's the more complicated patients that might have seen another GP and we're not getting it right. How can we make it right? But it's my bread and butter. And actually what we need to make sure is, as all the doses have been picked up over the last few years, we need to make sure that everyone is protected properly with progesterone.
Exactly. Thank you for saying that. It's a really important message that needs to get out there.
100%.
Because there's a lot of people who think that, hormones are sort of like vitamin pills and you can just take some more and you'll be fine. And it's not like that.
Yep. Or borrowing someone else's, or tweaking up the dose themselves, or forgetting the progesterone. We get that a lot, particularly with the tablets. And I understand, because they know which one makes them feel better. And it's not the progesterone. Progesterone's the protein. It's the, so it
But it helps with sleep, doesn't it? Progesterone. I mean, I used to have it at night. Yeah.
Yeah. The utrogestan definitely helps with sleep. The Mirena won't have that same effect on sleep, but the tablet form does. So I think we need to give equal importance to both the hormones.
So as I've got you here, I want to go just back to histamine. So what are histamine heavy, dense foods? And also, I've got another question that's just come back to me. You talked about your mum and her face swelling up when she had a glass of wine. Well, I've spent time in China and I know lots of Chinese people who can't drink alcohol because their face will swell up and get red, very quite swollen sometimes. Is that histamine, or is that some other genetic thing?
So there's an enzyme that metabolizes alcohol, and there are genetic influences. And in the Chinese subgroup, they do have less of this enzyme. But again, there may be, Chinese food will have a lot of histamine and some of the things that they use. So with regard to histamine in the foods, you're looking at a lot of fruit and veg. So things like berries, avocados, tomatoes. Honestly, you can hear me crying.
All the good stuff.
I know.
Oh my goodness.
And what's really,
because we're supposed to eat berries, aren't we?
I know. All
I
these
eat berries
things we're meant to eat. Avocado, they're healthy fat. My little face, honestly, spinach, buckets of histamine. So I had to stop drinking my spinach smoothies, which I still have, which would obviously be with fruit and things. But what the important thing to say is, I will eat these things, but you eat them when they're not ripe. So the riper your fruit or veg, the more histamine. And I've actually tested it on myself. I've eaten a raw sort of strawberries, like less ripe, and then I've eaten some that are almost going off and really soft, and I will start itching. So eat fruit and veg that's not ripe. If you've got this, things like certain whole grains, I'm going to cry even more in a minute, and all the things with like kombucha, kefir, as I've mentioned, they all have high histamine. And guess what doesn't have histamine in, or much? What? All the basic white produce.
the processed stuff, the ultra
Yeah,
processed stuff.
there's not much histamine in all of that. So yeah, it's really difficult. And there are diet sheets which I give my patients. I've had a couple of patients who I think that might have it. And what I've said to them is that you go away. I think this is what I think you might have. You now need to go away and exclude histamine for a few weeks and then re-challenge yourself with these foods and see what happens. And it's barn door. For me, it was like that so it's not an instant reaction. It was like sort of 24 hours later, the symptoms started to come back. And what I've done is I've introduced things back slowly. So I was taking strong antihistamines. There's some evidence that ascorbic acid or vitamin C 3 times a day can help with this. There's the Dow enzyme. There's obviously, avoiding ripe produce. So I think, and I hope that more work will be done in the menopause field with regard to this, because as I say, it's commoner than people think.
Wow. My mind is blown, actually, because I'm always defending menopause. And I'm saying it's not all her fault. And here we have another example of something which is probably exacerbated by the hormonal changes, but that doesn't mean it's menopause causing it. It's actually a histamine intolerance.
Yeah. And they're fortunately, they're like brother and sister, histamine and estrogen. So as my hormones go up and down, so does this histamine intolerance thing. So, I can be free from it for a couple of weeks, and then suddenly, bang, it will come back. But as I say, I think for me, it was so important to get the balance right in terms of my eating and healthy eating and histamine, but also then with my HRT and histamine. And I think, as ladies, we need personalized care. And that is something that, you have to tailor to yourself and what's acceptable for you.
I think that's the key thing as well, isn't it? Because we assume that kind of HRT is a one and done. And it's actually a really complicated medication. You've got to tweak it. You've got to get it right. We're all individuals. Everything's different. And there might be all sorts of other moving parts involved in the equation.
And that's what I say to my ladies that I prescribe to HRT to. I say, you all like to find the right facial moisturizer, and it might not be one product. You might go through several products. We have to do the same thing for your body. Not this, we don't go to the same HRT for each patient. We, take into account all their risk factors, all their symptoms, and we try to do our best for that patient. If that doesn't work, that's okay. Let's try it for 2 or 3 months and let's go back to something else, or let's change the dose, or let's review. And we can't get it. We often don't get it right first time. If I do, it's a real bonus. That makes me really happy. When ladies come in, they go, oh my God, it's changed my life. I feel like me again. I cannot tell you. It just makes my day. Makes my day.
Brilliant. I'm so glad that you went back to being a GP. I know it's exhausting, but my goodness me, you're so powerful because of the knowledge you have. Because, doctors get a lot of stick, especially when it comes to menopause. Do you think it's now better? Do you think doctors have a better understanding of menopause? And also, I would say, nutrition, because nutrition isn't a very big part.
We're not taught at med school. No, and menopause, I think, was probably a 1-hour lecture. We are not taught about it. And actually, that's why I went on to do diplomas and various things in women's health and reproductive health, because actually it's so important to have that knowledge and then to be able to spread that knowledge. So one of my jobs is to then teach my predominantly male partners in my practice and the other GPs about this. And I've done them all little handouts like Noddy's Guide to HRT Made Easy. And if they get stuck after that, then they send them to me, which is absolutely fine. But I think we are seeing an evolution and a change in GPs' attitudes, in knowledge, and it will take time, but that is happening. You can't ignore what's out there and the patients that are coming to you and the media. And so I think menopause is featured highly. Like, we have to do what's called CPD, which is continuous professional development. We have to educate ourselves every year with a minimum of 50 hours. And that is something that's high up on all of our agendas. And if we don't know, then we need to send to someone that does. We need to stop saying to you ladies, there's nothing else I can do. There is something else we can do. And if you don't know, then let's find someone that does.
And is the histamine message getting out there as well?
I still think that is people, I've obviously shared that with my own doctor community, but it's something that's not out there yet. It's something that we need to get the messaging out there for. I had never heard of it myself, Rachel, before I self-diagnosed I hadn't heard of it. And actually a lot of people I speak to, even within the menopause community, haven't really heard of it.
Well, there's me, I'll put my hand up. I have heard of it, but I don't know enough about it. And again, I had assumed it was pollen. I hadn't realised the histamine, the link with estrogen, foods.
And the link with estrogen and the link with our own body.
No. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of work that we still need to do, and actually funding towards research for this, Rachel. We talk about this, the health inequality.
Yeah.
And actually we have not had the money invested into this because it is debilitating. I've been through a lot, and I have to say, having histamine intolerance, when I couldn't sleep at night, I will send you photos after this. I had things that were weeping this big on my body, lesions that were weeping, and no one knew what they were. And I think,
and it was histamine.
It was all histamine driven. And even when I had the skin biopsy was basically showing a sort of allergy reactive changes. That's all histamine. It would fit.
So is there a test for this? Or is it trial and error?
It's at the minute there isn't on the NHS, but I think it is about exclusion and then reintroduction, and that's a lot for things like food intolerances and allergies. You've got to exclude foods with histamine and then re-challenge yourself. And it's very obvious, Rachel. I mean, there was no shadow of a doubt, that as soon as I started ingesting all those things, it came back with a vengeance.
It's fascinating because I'm always saying to women, stay curious, listen to your body, be curious about what's happening. Because I always talk about menopause symptoms as being the canary in the coal mine, and it's our body trying to tell us things that we might need to change. So, for example, cut down on the caffeine if we're having heart palpitations and high anxiety, stop drinking the alcohol if we can't sleep, and the caffeine if we can't sleep. But there's these things we need to take things away and then, as you say, reintroduce them slowly and see what that impact has on our overall health.
I think, and that's the thing, we are all individuals. So what, your friend's telling you helped her might not necessarily help you, but try one thing at a time. And that's the one thing I do say is always, if you're going to do something, just try one thing at a time, because things can really muddy and then you won't know what's worked and what's not, or what the culprit is, as it were. But lifestyle, is a massive thing. And again, with menopause, and that's something, again, that I've said to the partners, please give them this information, the other doctors, give them this information leaflet, because it's not just about the HRT. One of the biggest things I am faced with is the weight gain and, midlife. And, I haven't got that magic wand, but I can certainly empower you with tools to try and help with this, whether that be dietary advice, whether that be changing the way you're exercising and strength training. And, again, that education isn't freely out there for women. And I think it's something that we should be taught as well, somewhere along the line.
Anisha, I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful to what you're doing and who you are and everything about you. And when we talked about this initially, we were going to talk about women's cancers, weren't we? Women's cancer, and we haven't done that because you're a specialist in women's health. We've talked about completely different things. So I would like to extend an invitation for you to come back sometime and let's have another conversation. But as we wind up, I would just, what would you most like to get across to the world?
The thing that's most important to me is knowing you're normal. If you don't know what's normal for you, so if you don't know what your breasts feel like, or what your vulva looks like, or what your skin looks like, how will you know when something changes? And I think a lot of us are too busy or haven't thought about it or haven't been educated about doing these self-checks once a month. How many women have actually put a mirror down to their vulva and had a look? How many women do their, examinations for their breasts every month, for example? Do you look at your poo? Do you look at your wee? I'm not saying you need to do this every day, but once a month, have a self-check knowing you're normal. Because actually, when something changes, you are more likely to notice, and therefore, please go and see your GP. And that goes for the menopause too, knowing what you feel like normally and then seeing the changes. Write them down, keep a diary. If that's easier to go and show your doctor, I think sometimes it's easier for us to see as well how often you've been plagued by hot flushes, how many nights you didn't sleep, how many days were you getting bleeding from your vagina that shouldn't have been there. All those things help. So please know you're normal, document it if it helps, and go and see your doctor.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife, Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.